The New Orleans Saints wisely stay out of another trade for another big star in the NFL. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a deep dive here, which is what we're going to be doing every Thursday at different elements of the roster, different statistics from 2023. Just an opportunity for us to really buckle down and then dive deep into maybe some second level analysis on some of the big themes of 2023 going in to 2024. And today we're looking at the wide receivers. We're going to take a look at how the Saints can fill their needs at wide receiver in the NFL draft and the right fits to get that done using data and analytics. We're also going to be taking a look with those data and analytics at what exactly is missing for the New Orleans Saints in their wide receiver room. And we're going to kick everything off with the New Orleans Saints' most recent wise decision, which was not making that trade for Stefon Diggs. I'm going to tell you why I can celebrate that trade for the Texans, but also celebrate the Saints for not bringing in redundant talent to their wide receiver room. I'll explain more here in just a little bit. Appreciate everybody so much. As always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the new promo code Locked On NFL for $20 off of your first purchase. The New Orleans Saints did not get involved, or let me not say did not get involved, but they did not pull the trigger, at least, on a trade for former Bills, now Houston Texans wide receiver Stefon Diggs. And for the first time in a long time, an offseason trade happened somewhere else in the NFL. And I didn't get a bunch of questions about, well, why didn't the Saints do that? Why couldn't the Saints do that? The Houston Texans gave up a second round pick to bring in Stefon Diggs. And they also brought in, I think it was like a 6th and a 7th round pick or something like that as well. They brought in some extra picks that came along with Stefon Diggs as well, which is a move that the New Orleans Saints absolutely could have made, even with a future second, as opposed to a second in this year. And we didn't see them be the ones to pull the trigger. Instead, we watched the Houston Texans continue on with what has been a stellar offseason for them. And listen, I celebrate the move by the Texans of landing Stefon Diggs because they don't have that style, that type of receiver. They don't have a bona fide guy that they can go to, play in and play out. But now you add in sort of this new version of Nico Collins, the sort of, the evolution of Tank Dell that continues. The next phase, next step of John Mechie over there is going to be a lot of fun to watch as well. It was a guy that we were high on here on the show during his draft year, as we were with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. We like wide receivers on the show. That's what we're doing in a wide receiver episode today. So the Saints not getting involved in this trade just shows you a little bit more of sort of the pragmatism of their understanding of where they are, right? They're not in a situation where they can turn around and make these types of luxury moves for a 30-year-old wide receiver. And when I say 30-year-old wide receiver, I'm not saying that with any disdain, but this team does have to focus on getting younger. Stefon Diggs is going to be good for another some odd number of years, right? It doesn't matter that he's 30 years old. It matters that he's Stefon Diggs. But for the New Orleans Saints, they kind of have their Stefon Diggs. Now, he has to have a Stefon Diggs type of year of production. He has to develop a Stefon Diggs type of mentality on the field, maybe not necessarily off the field, but on the field. And to me, that's Chris Olave. I've actually heard a lot of people, including NFL scouts, compare Chris Olave's game to Stefon Diggs' game. So bringing in something that would have been redundant doesn't make a lot of sense. And Chris Olave is developing as that play-in and play-out option for the New Orleans Saints. Now, let me be very clear, because there are a lot of people that might scoff when they hear that. I'm not saying that Chris Olave right now is who Stefon Diggs is right now, but bringing in a Stefon Diggs would immediately stifle Chris Olave's ability to be able to get to that level. And if you're doing a 1-2 year rental on a guy like Stefon Diggs, is that worth risking the long-term development of the guy that's already on your roster that plays with a similar type of play style, with speed, the ability to go up and get it. That's my ball type of mentality. Like those are the things that Chris Olave has exhibited and exhibited more of towards the end of the 2023 season. If you watch the first, let's call it 11 games, okay? The first 11 games of the 2023 season that he played in, and then you look at the last 6 or, whatever. I'm not mathing well this morning, but you get what I'm saying. No, that's 17. I mathed so well that I thought I didn't math well. One of the biggest things that I thought was one of the biggest credits that I give Chris Olave for evolving his game last year was the fact that towards the end of the season, instead of him catching passes and getting out of bounds or catching passes and getting down, you saw him catch passes and turn upfield, start to go and pick up more yards. Now that's going to become more and more of a habit, more and more of a what do you call it? Like a second nature or whatever. It's going to be more and more of that with new wide receiver coach Keith Williams in the building, because he's going to teach that, right? That is a hard-nosed, sort of tough love type coach that's going to teach you, hey, when you get the ball in your hands, go and pick up yards. Don't worry about getting down. Don't worry about doing it. Go and get yards and everything. And then I think that you start to develop maybe that next kind of level of the game for Chris Olave. And so I think that that's the next step for him. And I think that as he develops that, his game starts to get Stefon Diggsier and Stefon Diggsier and Stefon Diggsier by the year. It's not going to happen by the game, but by the year. And so I think that level of development, that level of trust that needs to be put into Chris Olave as the number one option, not the X receiver, but the number one option in the offense, number one in the practice reps, number one, on the depth chart, number one on the roster. Well, I guess the roster's alphabetical, but you get what I'm saying. He's got to be the guy. In theater, we would say number one on the call sheet. He gets the title credit. And so it's like all of these things are the ones that you're looking for from Chris Olave. That I think if the Saints would have traded for Stefon Diggs, although there would have been a lot of excitement around that because Stefon Diggs is an extraordinary wide receiver. It would have been really cool for the short term, but in the long term might have ended up costing you some of the development for a guy that is a young star that you're hoping to eventually develop into a superstar. So I think this was another good trade, just like the Justin Fields trade, for the New Orleans Saints to sort of not participate in, or at least not pull the trigger on. They might have been a part of the phone calls. They might have had the negotiations. They might have called or gotten called, whatever. Those conversations could have happened, but they're not the ones to pull the trigger. And so while I can simultaneously say, hey, that was a fantastic move by the Houston Texans for what they need for their rookie quarterback and building around their rookie quarterback contract, let's not forget the financial part of all of this as well. We knew the New Orleans Saints weren't going to be big players in free agency. That also means they're not going to be big players in the trade market, right? And that's why even like my T. Higgins pipe dream, which I think would be the version of that trade that makes a ton of sense for New Orleans. And maybe now you know what the price of that trade is, right? Which is fairly manageable. That's one that makes sense because of the style of receiver that the New Orleans Saints are in need of and can end up helping, as opposed to stifling the development of your other players. So let's get to that next. What is it exactly that the New Orleans Saints are missing in their wide receiver room? I think that there's 2 prototypes that they're missing. Let's discover which each one of those are with stats, data, analysis, all of that from the 2023 season. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Well, Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost to every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is boosting also every single dollar that you transfer from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gives you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with that 3% match. This offer is good through only April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match does require Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of your first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years, and the 3% match on transfers is subject to terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. All right, family. Hey, the New Orleans Saints have some good talent in their wide receiver room, but absolutely have some prototypes that they're missing. And there's two in particular that I was able to discover by a little bit of a deep dive into what this team looked like with the receivers that they have currently on the field or currently on their roster when they were on the field in 2023. So we're going to break that down. We're going to take a look as well as how you can address some of those needs in this year's NFL draft. We appreciate you very much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. Every day. Hey, if you're tired of tuning into ESPN and Fox Sports and hearing a bunch of people yell at each other and talk about things that they've never covered before and don't have any intimate knowledge of, Locked On Sports Today is the absolute place for you to go and check out. You can head over to Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 national sports stream, the first of its kind on YouTube. You can find it by heading over to Locked On Sports Today. You can also find it on the free Amazon TV channels app as well. Locked On Sports Today, delivering you everything you need to know from around the world of sports with the local experts that are actually like entrenched, know what's going on. So here's what I want to get to next. I wanted to take a look at sorry, let me reset something here. So Thursday deep dive, okay? This is what we're going to be doing every Thursday, just like we have our midweek fundamentals that we'll do every Wednesday. And of course, like this will be superseded sometimes by big news and things like that. We'll go away from it a little bit after the draft and then come back to it before we get to like training camp and all the other stuff. So just to kind of give you the idea, the rhythm behind all this. And so the idea behind the Thursday deep dive is to take overarching themes of the 2023 season, start to look ahead to the 2024 season and what needs to change or what needs to be built upon or what needs to be maintained and everything. And so for this time, what I want to look at is what needs to be built upon in the New Orleans Saints wide receiver room. The wide receivers that they had on the roster last year, guys like Michael Thomas, Keith Kirkwood, Lynn Bowden, currently all not back. Right now, the Saints have 5 wide receivers on their roster. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and A.T. Perry are the returning 3. You've got Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed each going into their 3rd year. You got A.T. Perry going into his 2nd year. They also brought in Stanley Morgan, the guy who's a New Orleans native or New Orleans area native, who has spent the last 4 years with the Cincinnati Bengals, mostly primarily as a gunner, but does want to reintroduce himself as a wide receiver with this team. But also, he's going to be utilized as a gunner because the New Orleans Saints have kind of, been moving around at the gunner opposite JT Gray. It's been a little bit of Isaac Yiadom, a little bit of Alontae Taylor, but now Isaac Yiadom's gone. Now Alontae Taylor has a full-time role, whether it's in the slot or outside, more than likely in the slot as we look at it right now, at least. And so Stanley Morgan's going to get the opportunity to compete. Stanley Morgan Jr., not the financial company, but Stanley Morgan Jr., the wide receiver, formerly of Nebraska. He's going to get the opportunity to compete as the starting gunner. So he'll have that, but then he also, wants to say like, hey, I could be a receiver in this league as well. And then Cedrick Wilson Jr., another guy that I really like and I'm high on. I think that he's going to be somebody that's going to be able to help the team operate, out of the slot, have a big slot that can, hit the middle of the field, things like that. And that's part of what we're going to get to here in a little bit in terms of filling out these 2 prototypes. So the 2 prototypes that I feel that the New Orleans Saints are missing, one of which we've discussed a ton, is the X receiver. Now that could be A.T. Perry. And I don't think that I've given enough conversation to that. I think that could be A.T. Perry. I think that that's where we're going to kind of dive into a little bit more in tomorrow's episode. Can A.T. Perry step into Michael Thomas's X receiver role? I'll explain why I think that he can, but the things that he has to do in order to, he's got a couple of boxes to check, right? And that's going to come over the course of the offseason. You can't expect that he's going to check those boxes though, so you have to continue to bring in competition. So X receiver is a big part of it. Just as a quick reminder, when we talk about X receiver, we're talking about kind of the big-bodied possession receiver that lines up over on the split side. You could also hear the phrase like split end, lines up on the weak side, doesn't have anybody else. He's out there on an island and then makes plays by running levels at all 3, or running routes at all 3 levels. My apologies. So I think that's a piece. The other piece, and this is where we'll do our deep dive, is that the Saints need somebody that can take a reception between, let's call it 0 to 4 yards, so ahead of the line of scrimmage in the short area of the field, and turn it into a big play. They need a yards after catch receiver. Let's take a look at some of the numbers behind the Saints when it came to their kind of production in the short area of the field. So really we're looking at, okay, so PFF designates this as 0 to 9. So I was being a little dramatic when I said 0 to 4. Fine. I'll take that. So looking at Derek Carr's numbers we can see sort of where the Saints focus on the short and intermediate, or the short area of the field and all that. So not a bad completion percentage at all, 78.9%. 5.9 yards per attempt. So even targeting between 0 to 9 yards, you're still picking up almost half of that. That's not fair. Let's say only 2/3 of that amount in terms of its max. Average depth of target was only 4 yards. That's why I said 0 to 4 yards. That's where that came from. See, I was prepared. And then the passer rating was only 96.8, which was the lowest passer rating of anything ahead of the line of scrimmage. So it was really the short area of the field where you saw things kind of get, I'll call it not that it wasn't consistent enough, right? It wasn't like enough of their offense. And one thing to kind of give you an idea of that is that the Saints had 20 drops on Derek Carr passes, according to Pro Football Focus. And I'm just focusing on Derek Carr's passes because he's going to be the quarterback in 2024. Like, that's the reason why I'm focusing on. This isn't really about Derek Carr. This is about the receivers. But 15 of those 20 drops came between 0 to 9 yards. So you need a sure-handed guy that's going to be able to do that. So that's part of the X receiver part. And that's also part of the yards after catch thing, because you can't get yards after if you can't catch, right? You got to check one box before you can check the other. And so 15 drops between 0 to 9 yards is, I mean, when you've got 20, like that's 3/4 of your drops in the quote unquote easiest area of the field, right? The most immediate area of the field, we'll call it, not the easiest, but the most immediate area of the field. So that gives you a little bit of a glimpse into why the X receiver is so important, because you do need somebody that's going to be able to run those routes and be a 3-level threat from that X receiver mold. And then allowing Chris Olave to move around, Rashid Shaheed to move around. That's maybe where a guy like A.T. Perry can kind of come into play and help out in those situations. And just looking at what A.T. Perry, could potentially add when it comes to that, a lot of what we saw, because we didn't see A.T. Perry get super involved in the offense until the last 7 games, but a lot of it was a little bit deeper down the field, all of these other things. And it was, fades to the back of the end zone. Like, all that stuff is great. But when it came down to, he was only targeted 4 times in the short area of the field. Now, he was only targeted a total of 18 times? Yeah, 18 times. But 4 of those came in the short area of the field, 2 receptions for 12 yards. And then the average depth of target there was 5.5 yards. And then yards per reception was 6 yards, right? So what you're looking at there is, effectively, picking up a half a yard each of those plays. That's a very small sample size, but the 56.3 passer rating, I think, is still telling off of that small sample size. So that's not an indictment on A.T. Perry, but like, if he develops that level, then all of a sudden, okay, cool, we can start talking about him as a potential guy that makes sense for the for that sort of short area of the field. The yards after catch piece is pretty simple, right? The Saints were 25th in the NFL at 10.4 yards after catch per reception. Now, they were tied with the Chiefs, but outside of the Chiefs, who are the clear outlier in that situation, they're around teams like the Raiders and the Chargers and the Broncos. Not good company, to say the least, to be around. So the Saints were 25th in the NFL. So very, very low on the yards after catch bit. So I think the guy that's going to be able to help you in the short area, the guy that's going to be able to help you in the middle of the field, the Saints were 18th in the NFL when it came to percentage of targets thrown to the middle of the field at only 18%. So they didn't target the middle of the field as much as they should. They didn't get the production out of the short area of the field on a consistent enough basis to build an offense off of it. And then they don't have the yards after catch like they used to. They don't have the yards after catches compared to the rest of the NFL, all those other things. So I think those 3 things tell you that the X receiver is a big need, short and middle. And then the yards after catch receiver, short and lack of yards after catch, kind of gives you that. The Saints can find both of those molds in this year's draft. Let's identify some of that talent here as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, and there's a new promo code for Game Time. So I want you to make sure you listen for that new promo code. It's not just Locked On, it's Locked On NFL. So we're going to get to that here in just a moment. I'll tell you what you'll get with that promo code, but I want to tell you a little bit about Game Time first. When it comes to Game Time, it's my favorite place to get them tickets. I was actually talking to a good friend of mine who hosts our Locked On Red show, Jeff Carr. He and his wife live very, very close to the ballpark in Cincinnati. And so they sit down before every game, right? Get ready to watch the game on TV. dressed and ready to go to the park. They have their Game Time app open and they just flip through the Game Time app until they find a ticket price that they like. Once they do, they go to the game. If there's not anything there, they sit at home and they watch the game. How cool is that? This includes, by the way, them getting club seats for $20 not too long ago. How awesome is that? So make sure you go and check them out today, because right now you can actually get $20 off with your first purchase when you use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Here's all you got to do. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. That might be club seats right there for you already. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. I recently used eBay Motors. I wanted to buy one of those like tire inflators and things like that. And I also use it to replace the windshield wipers on my car here recently, as the rain season is, of course, on the way here in New Orleans. Is there anything that's not a rain season? So whether it's passion, drive, or patience, the formula for a winning championships, that also is what helps keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything that you need to be able to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance on the way, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and much more. Everything that you're looking for, you're going to be able to find for your number one ride or die. You're going to find exactly what it is. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, every part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home some huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit available only to U.S. customers. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. If the New Orleans Saints are looking for an X receiver, and if you're looking for a yards after catch receiver, guess what? They can find both in this year's NFL draft. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Now, will they double dip at wide receiver is a different question. However, certainly an option. Certainly an option. Of course, there's still some free agents out there available for them too, but I like talking about the NFL draft. So we're going to start off with the NFL draft here. In tomorrow's episode, don't forget, we are your team every day, so we'll be back tomorrow. In tomorrow's episode, we're going to dive a little bit deeper. Slow down, Ross. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the A.T. Perry conversation. Can A.T. What are the boxes? I've got 3 boxes that A.T. Perry needs to check to be able to be the next Michael Thomas. So we'll either spend a portion or the entire episode tomorrow talk about A.T. Perry being the next Michael Thomas, or not the next Michael Thomas, but like next in that role. Like, I'm never trying to compare player to player. It's always about comparing like the player role to the player role and responsibility. So that's what we're going to be looking at in tomorrow's episode. Make sure you come back for that. We are your team every day. So what have we identified? We've identified that the New Orleans Saints need 2 prototypes of receiver. Okay. And to be very clear about this, there's 4 ways for them to get that receiver. Okay. One of the receivers that they already have steps up into the role. That's absolutely an option. Hence the A.T. Perry conversation. Free agency, trade, can be a lower level trade, right? Lower level free agent, money wise, monetarily, and then the NFL draft. Those are the ways that they can do that. They can do free agency now. They can do free agency after the draft, where they're not having to worry about compensatory pick formulas and all these other things. They can also do free agency after training camp when players get cut. You know how this goes. So the 2 types of receivers that they need: X receiver, outside, short, intermediate, middle of the field type of attack, solid hands, all those other things. Again, 15 drops within 9 yards last year. Like, it's a little much. And then that yards after catch receiver. Can you take something and force missed tackles and turn it into a bigger gain? Let's start off with the X receiver conversation, because I think that one's more brief. And then we'll get into the bigger one, which is the yards after catch receiver. But I think that the X receiver is arguably more important, right? Inarguably more important. In this year's draft, guys like Xavier Legette, guys like Brenden Rice, guys like Keon Coleman, don't want to forget him, A.D. Mitchell. Like, there's a lot of these receivers that can fill that role. To an extent, maybe Troy Franklin too. Troy Franklin came in a little light. It was like 180-something, 187 or something like that pounds. It came in a little bit shorter than expected, all that. But then, there's other big guys like Johnny Wilson, who's like 6'4", 6'5", or whatever. Like, there are these other players as well. So there's a lot of these players. So I mentioned Brenden Rice. Brenden Rice, the wide receiver out of USC. I've mocked him to the Saints in Monday's Mock Draft Monday if you want to hear a little bit more about Brenden Rice. But I'll tell you this, the other thing that I like about drafting Brenden Rice is you get Jerry Rice with him, and you get Jerry Rice coming in and talking to your wide receivers and all this other stuff. Like, love that, set that up, happy with it. Guys like Keon Coleman out of Florida State was this receiver that just took so much flack because he ran, not a very impressive 40, but then he got out there and ran the fastest when it came to the gauntlet drill. Now, even the gauntlet drill isn't super replicable in terms of like what it is that you're doing at the NFL level and how you're actually running routes and stuff like that. It's still running in a straight line, but you're having to run in a straight line, contort your body, turn, catch, all these other things. So it shouldn't be discounted. To me, that has a little bit more value than the actual 40-yard dash itself. 40-yard dash is fun. It's great. It's fantastic television. But, you're not going to get that situation very often where you're running without, well, you're certainly never going to get the situation where you're running without pads in a game, but you get what I'm saying. So Keon Coleman absolutely fits all of that stuff. And then the last thing that we're looking at as well is this sort of level of receiver that is like the Troy Franklin, Xavier Legette, A.D. Mitchell, all of these guys who have size. Like A.D. Mitchell, one of the ones and this is Adonai Mitchell, who's coming out of Texas. He's the other Texas receiver that still is getting a lot of shine. Ran awesome at the combine, but also like has just shown up in big game after big game after big game, right? Like we've seen him make big plays every single time that he's been called upon and had the opportunity to impact massive games and all that. I mean, you look at the playoffs and everything and how many touchdowns he scored in those situations, like really good stuff there. Or how often he's been trusted in those situations, let's say it that way. So like there's the X receiver mold types out there. A.D. Mitchell might blend a little bit, right, in terms of like all the different ways that he can go. But guys like Xavier Legette, guys like Brenden Rice, guys like Keon Coleman, guys like Johnny Wilson. These are all guys that can be your X receiver lined up on the outside. So they absolutely have those players in this year's draft. The yards after catch receiver, there are a couple of those as well. You look at Anaya Smith. Coming out of, what is that, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Malik Washington. If you want an interview, I've talked about Malik Washington before, by the way. It's a little bit of a smaller receiver, but coming out of Virginia, has that yards after catch ability and everything, constantly breaking big plays and all that. He's one of the guys that has like one of the larger or one of the better yards after catch per reception stats in this draft class, along with Anaya Smith, who's at 10 yards per reception, right? 10 yards after catch per reception. That's really, really good coming out of Texas A&M. But if you want to hear more about Malik Washington, they actually interviewed him over on Locked On NFL. You could find, or Locked On NFL Draft. You can find that pretty quick. Local talent, very good local talent in Jaquan Jackson out of Tulane, 10.6 yards after catch per reception. Here's a name that I haven't talked about a bunch, but I think is perfect for what it is that New Orleans Saints are looking for, or I haven't talked about lately a bunch because I knew he was going to come back up in a conversation. Malachi Corley. Hello, welcome back. Welcome back to the show, Malachi. Appreciate you very much for stopping by. 9.7 yards after catch per reception. Okay. But also a class-leading 39.6% avoided tackle percentage or missed tackle force percentage. So not only is he breaking tackles and creating for himself, he's turning that into production. Let me give you an example, the opposite of that, all right? We talked about Jaquan Jackson. Jaquan Jackson, 10.6 yards after catch, really, really nice, but only forcing missed tackles on 28.1% of those opportunities. And so what we're looking at there is a guy that's probably building up a lot of his yards after catch with nobody in front of him. Malachi Corley is weaving through, breaking a ton of tackles, nearly 40% of the tackles that come his way, and is gathering less than a yard after catch per reception, than Jaquan Jackson. Here's another example of another way that this can work. Xavier Legette, 38.9% missed tackle percentage. That's second in this year's class, but only 5.9 yards after catch. So that makes him a really good X receiver option. He's not picking up a ton of targets, or he's not picking up a ton of yards after the catch to the extent of a Malachi Corley or a Jaquan Jackson or an Anaya Smith. However, he's breaking tackles and it's tough to bring him down. And so that he's the type of guy that you look at and say, okay, get him an 8-yard pass, he can turn it into an 11-yard gain and a first down. Really, really good. The other side of that coin when it comes to yards after catch is Malachi Corley. Pick up a ton of yards after the catch and do so by creating for yourself. 39.6% missed tackles force percentage. That's really, really good. Malachi Corley has already visited on a top 30 visit, I believe, with the Cleveland Browns, and he has another one scheduled with the Baltimore Ravens. If you want to know if someone's a good draft prospect, look at who the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens are looking at, because they always have really good draft classes. Even though they don't always pan out, they always have solid draft classes. And so just another tick mark, if you will, for Malachi Corley, and why the New Orleans Saints should draft him. Even at 45, I don't care. Get yourself a Malachi Corley. So yeah, the Saints absolutely have what they need in this year's draft to get what they still need to add to their wide receiver room with some really, really good talent. All right, coming up tomorrow, don't forget A.T. Perry. Can he be the next Michael Thomas? We're going to get to that. We're also going to include one of our insiders actually asked that question in one of our exclusive Q&As. So I'll bring a little bit of that into this as well. And of course, give that shout out. So we appreciate you very much. As always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. The New Orleans Pelicans absolutely in a tailspin right now. If you want to hear more about it, go and check out Locked On Pelicans as your second listen today over with Jake Madison. You can also check out Locked On LSU with Caroline Finn. Appreciate you, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.